the legislation fails?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Mr Chair, I just want to take the opportunity to answer a few questions, queries, suggestions and other matters that have been raised across this chamber. I think the first sort of issue I'll deal with was addressed by Annette King. She asked what they would look like. I mean, this is just a clear example, very similar to the Australian packages. They have some images on them, they have health warnings, they are, as the member has already stated, that they are adapted to New Zealand conditions. There is a Māori health warning, but this is just an example. It's a prototype, hasn't been finalised. It will be finalised, of course. It's part of the regulations that will go out to form part of this legislation as we proceed, not just through the House, but through the public consultation process. But happy to share this with the member after this session, and the Select Committee, of course. Secondly, there has been talk about some type of delay in this legislation. Can I just say up front that our government has been transparent, that we would keep a watching brief on the World Trade Organisation case that was put against Australia. We would keep a watching brief through our foreign affairs and trade officials. We would look at how that case transpired. And we would also look at the evidence around standardised packaging and how it worked in Australia. And some might say, you know, we want to be world leaders at this and, you know, like the Olympics, making these comparisons. But sometimes, sir, a cautious approach, a considered approach, an approach based on science and evidence is the way to go. I hear, you know, in some pieces, in some debates, people talking about science and how we should test it. Well, it has been tested now. And the evidence out of Australia, and that was only available earlier this year, where they showed that a quarter of the reduction in smoking prevalence in Australia could be attributed to standardised packaging. And that's evidence now that we can hold up. And there is room for members in this House who've had opinions that weren't tested around science to then change that opinion and vote for a piece of legislation which will, based on evidence, based on science, make a difference. So there is also, and based on the advice, I should say, from those officials, we now know that we are on strong grounds for putting this legislation through the House. We also know, as I've already stated, that other countries are taking up standardised packaging legislation, and those countries are not subject to WTO action. Those are tangible things that we can point to, which demonstrate to us that we are on strong grounds and that we should proceed with this piece of legislation. So I want to just address that point, that it is considered. And to say that this was introduced, this was in the House in 2013, well, actually, it was introduced in the House in 2013, December. It was had its first reading in February, and it has. And the progression of this bill is not inconsistent with other bills that have gone through this House, sir. I want to thank the member, Louisa Walsh. She's since left, but I just wanted to note that she talked about the time, in terms of the SOP, the time in which this legislation should come into force after this bill. And she noted the various times. But what is important here, and the Select Committee considered these matters. The Select Committee, it's important to note, the Select Committee looked at these matters and they rejected these assertions. And the reason I made the analogy, and I will state publicly, I apologise, it was in jest. And Barbara Stewart and I have a strong relationship. We have a positive relationship. She seems surprised. You know, in that those were the arguments that were put forward by the tobacco industry and Select Committee. They were rejected wholeheartedly by the Select Committee. I reject them wholeheartedly too. I think where the regulations will be developed over time, that we need that level of flexibility within this legislation. We know that the regs have been developed. We know that they will come into force after this bill is passed. And so we need that flexibility. On the second SOP, in terms of the wash-through, can I say to that member that the transitional provisions in the bill are clear, Mr Chair, that they currently allow for 2 wash-through periods, and that member knows that. And the 3-month, the 12-week wash-through period, the total period, is actually longer than the period that was allowed in Australia. It was longer than that period. The member notes the member notes, and I'll agree with it, that there were some teething issues, but we believe, based on the Australian experience and the extended period under this bill, that there will be sufficient time for wash-through to occur in the New Zealand context. So, I accept the submission that she's made. However, I reject it alongside the Select Committee around whether this is sufficient time. Can I also just come back to members opposite talking about the overall package in terms of this, along with tax increases? I could talk about the overall package along with
No, you can't.
The e-cigarettes consultation paper that's been put out there. They talked about working together. I've always had my, my hand out to work alongside members opposite in terms of these initiatives, and I note Ms Wall and I constantly go to events relating to smoking cessation, constantly support those groups that are determined to bring down the smoking rates for New Zealanders. And so, and I agree with her that this is part of a culture change to make smoking less attractive. Okay, and I want to come back. I want to come back.
The Minister
to
will
why
come
this
back.
legislation is important. Can I, sir?
You sit down when I stand up. I am going to remind the Minister that I have been relatively tight on other parties, and to be fair, I'm not going to allow him to reply to irrelevancies from them.
Okay. And I want to come back to why this legislation is important, Mr Chair, and it's about the lives of New Zealanders. It's about the 4,500 to 5,000 New Zealanders that die prematurely. They're not about 4,500 people that die, as some people have said in this House. They're just premature deaths. They are people, they are New Zealanders that could live longer and enjoy time with their families, their communities. And of course there's the health cost of smoking, which I think is really important when you consider this piece of legislation as bringing about better change for New Zealanders as a whole. So while members opposite have made relevant points, I believe I've answered those in due course. I've given an undertaking that, this government is committed to this piece of legislation, is committed to the health of New Zealanders and bringing down the smoking prevalence of New Zealanders over time.
Reno Tirakadne.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm pleased to make a brief contribution in the committee stage of